So the idea here is that your body literally broadcasts your habitus. It literally broadcasts your cultural capital, and that is important. Why does it matter? Why? Some years ago, I was teaching a class at Rutgers, and I stayed late. And when I walked out in the hall after the class, I saw a young man at the end of the hall, and I went, oh my God, that guy looks like all the boys I see at Broad Market in Newark. He was African American. He was wearing the big baggies that were all in at that time. He kind of had that, move, that do not fuck with me look, right? And when I looked at him, he looked at me like this. And I was like, I've seen you a million times. I've seen a million versions of you. You are a very smart kid because you are here. Somehow you managed to get from the streets of Newark here. You are taking classes. You found a way to pay for it. You've got to be really smart to be here with all these other kids. But you still have the look of the streets, the things that you use to survive. And what's going to happen when you walk into your classroom and you sit down near the front row and you slump in your very sort of assertive, don't mess with me way, and that little 32-year-old white graduate student teaching the class at the front looks at you and goes, when you need a little extra help, is she going to help you? When you need some time off, or you can't take an exam because you've been taking care of your grandmother who was in the emergency room because she didn't have health insurance and you couldn't come to class, when you come and tell her that and you need to retake a test, is she going to believe you? That hard look that kept you alive in Newark, it's going to keep that teacher from investing in you. She's not going to be able to see that brain. All she's going to see is the threat. And I thought to myself, I hope to God someone takes this boy, this really smart boy who got here despite everything, and sits down with him and says, honey, this is how it is. Change your clothes, relax your shoulders. Don't stare so hard at your teachers. Smile. Be a little less threatening. Let them see you. Let them see who you really are. So we're going to do a switch here. Now I've armed you with all these terms, and you have done your part, and you have applied them all to your own life. You have asked yourself, what cultural capital do I have? What is my social capital like? Do I have a broad network or a small one? What are my clothes currently saying about me? And when I go home and put on my sweats, what will they say again? So you are doing your job. So when I looked at the 17 women in my study, there were some things that almost everyone experienced. At that time, they were all having HIV-related symptoms, medication side effects, or both. At the time of my study, this was a lot closer to the time of the 10 pills than the 2 pills. And they were all of them struggling. And they were all afraid. They were afraid of inadvertently abandoning their children because they thought they were going to die, or they were afraid they were going to die. And they were afraid, very, very afraid, that they would be called out, that they would be discovered because they got so terribly thin that they would no longer be able to hide what they had from their friends, from their neighbors, from their family, because a lot of these women, remember, a lot of Latino culture, or at least Puerto Rican culture, a lot of it is very conservative. And most of the women in my study, they didn't tell anyone, or very few people. Every one of them faced discrimination. Every one of them faced economic hardship. Every one of them experienced barriers to acquiring social services and clinical care. And I don't need to tell you about that because you are the experts. All the women wanted access to complementary and alternative medicine in addition to biomedicine. Every woman who was offered any opportunity to learn mindfulness meditation, to experience Reiki, to take herbs, to use acupuncture, to get massage. Not every woman wanted every modality, but every woman wanted to try. And almost every woman had 1 or 2 modalities that they really wanted access to that helped them with either their side effects or their symptoms. Every woman wanted continuity of care, and she wanted it from a doctor that she trusted, with whom she had an ongoing relationship. someone who offered her a non-judgmental emotional bond, who managed his or her power in a way that benefited them, and who displayed a commitment to their care over time. So, some of the women in my study were like Paquita. I called them average capital women because they were like most of us. They had some sense of the cultural capital outside of their own neighborhoods and their own ethnic communities, but really not much. They had some social capital within their neighborhoods, within their own communities, but once you got outside of their own little groupings, not really. So when they got diagnosed and they had to go into the healthcare system and they had to go into hospitals where there were lots of people who were different from them, they did not know what the rules were, and they didn't know what to do, and they had no one they trusted to call, and they were like deer in headlights. And they had greater social support needs than any of the women with broad capital, but they struggled harder to get them met, even though they tried. And I watched them try to build strong, ongoing relationships with doctors. They didn't know what to say. They scared them. They didn't know how to create rapport. Let me just give you a tiny example. For many of the Puerto Rican folks that I hung with, it was pretty normal to talk loud and use your hands a lot, sometimes to talk very loud. In clinic settings, this was not all right. This was disruptive. This bothered the nurses. And you know, the non-Puerto Rican nurses, they were like, what is this long nail thing? What are all these nails? They're like claws. So in all of these seemingly small ways, they pushed away the people they desperately needed to help them stay alive, and they didn't even know it. And the providers on the other end, they didn't understand what was happening either. These women in my study, and this is a small sample because qualitative researchers, we study small groups of people very intensely over time instead of large groups of people a little bit. But the women in this group reported more chronic symptoms and more medication side effects, or both. They wanted CAM just as much, but they ended up using fewer. And they really struggled to be agents in the world. They fought, they struggled, it was hard for them. Broad capital women, like Nini, like Deborah, they knew the score. Before they were even diagnosed, they understood the landscape. And when they were diagnosed, just like all the other women, they went into a long depression. When Nini found out that her husband actually had known that he was HIV positive and did not tell her, and had in fact married her and lived with her without telling her, when she discovered this outside of a testing facility, she picked up a chair and she hit him over the head with it. And somebody called the cops, and when the cops came and she explained why she had hit him with the chair, the cops let her go. So these women, they would initially get diagnosed, they would go through the same anguish, the same depression, and then they would come out of it and they'd be like, okay, who do I call? How many AIDS service organizations are there around here, and what do they offer me? They would do a complete search of the surrounding environment. They'd figure out what was there, who was there. They would immediately target one or two physicians, and like they were dating someone. They would build a strong rapport with that person. They collaborated with their clinicians and their social workers. Now, they worked a lot harder in terms of doing things, and so they tended to get sick, and when they got sick, they got really sick because they were going 100 miles an hour. They used more CAM modalities, and they were very, very successful at getting the best possible care under difficult circumstances where good care is hard to find. So I asked myself, what's the difference? I can clearly see these two groups of women, and if you look at this lovely chart that I gave you, once again, you will notice that they are divided. The broad capital women, the average capital women, and then I just have two women who are kind of in the middle, right? You can think of this as a range, right? So I looked at it and I was like, what's the difference? What makes a broad capital human? I know they're exceptional, but what is it? And first I thought, well, maybe it's a language barrier. No. There were broad capital women who spoke mostly Spanish. That wasn't it. Well, maybe it's being born on the mainland. You know, you get more familiar. No, made no difference. I looked at it. I was like, well, being married, they're all married. Having kids, they all have kids. What is it? And when I finally looked, when I finally made my little charts and looked out, this is what it was. The women who were broad capital women